Ever feel like you're trying to grasp the big picture, but there are just way too many details?
Yeah, it can be overwhelming.
Exactly. Today we're going to tackle something pretty significant, something that's still shaping the political landscape, the Ron Paul revolution. But don't worry, we'll break it down for you in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, we'll make it clear.
Awesome. So to get into this, we're diving into a fascinating YouTube transcript featuring Tom Woods talking about Ron Paul's impact. Think of this deep dive as your VIP pass to understanding a really key figure, and maybe even the unexpected roots of some major political movements we see today.
That's a great way to put it.
It's going to be interesting. So the source material here is a video from the Ron Paul Liberty Report called Tom Woods, The Ron Paulian Roots of the MAGA and What It Still Has to Learn.
Okay.
It centers around a speech by Woods, and what really grabbed my attention was the introduction. The speaker talks about attending one of Woods' talks like 20 years ago. Really makes you think about the long-term influence we're going to be exploring.
It does. Long-term impact.
Yeah, for sure. The introducer describes Woods as a brilliant communicator and a libertarian overachiever.
I can see that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Pigment mentions his podcast, his educational platforms, Liberty Classroom, the Ron Paul curriculum, even his best-selling books. Clearly, this guy's been deeply involved in these ideas for decades.
Definitely a long history there.
Absolutely. And then Woods starts his speech with a little joke about his speaking slot. Lighthearted moment.
I like that.
Me too. But then he dives right into his main point. And this is where we begin to understand why Ron Paul's 2007 presidential run was so important, at least according to Woods.
Right, the 2007 run.
Yeah. Okay, get ready for this. Woods claims that this run started the ball rolling on all the best parts of our present political moment. That's a big statement.
It is.
So let's unpack that a bit.
Okay.
Woods argues that Ron Paul, in a sense, made the range of acceptable political ideas wider.
Ah, you mean the Overton window.
Exactly, the Overton window. It's like the range of ideas the public is okay with considering mainstream, you know?
Yeah, I get that.
What Ron Paul did, according to Woods, was expand that window. How? By consistently talking about things that were before considered fringe outside the norm, talking honestly and directly about complex issues. No catchy slogans, no playing it safe.
So he was authentic, real.
Absolutely. And Woods brings in this quote from Jon Stewart, who talked about Paul's consistent, principled integrity, adding, kind of jokingly, that that's not something Americans usually go for.
Interesting.
I thought so too. It shows how Paul's realness connected with people who were tired of the usual political games.
Tired of the same old, same old.
Exactly. And this leads us to a really cool concept. The Third America. Woods mentions the Italian translation of Ron Paul's 2008 book, The Revolution. Guess what they called it in Italian?
No idea. Wow.
The Third America. It's not your typical left versus right thing.
So something different altogether.
Precisely. Woods describes it as an America that believes there are other choices, beyond the usual establishment thinking. Like in foreign policy, this Third America questions the constant cycle of sanctions and military intervention.
Okay, I see.
On the domestic side, it challenges the power of what some people call activist judges. And get this, it even advocates for abolishing the Department of Education.
Whoa, that's a big one.
I know, right? People hear that and they instantly think, you want to get rid of the Department of Education. You must hate education. But that's not the real argument, is it?
Not at all.
No.
Woods presents it as education being fundamentally a local thing, a local responsibility. He points out that things haven't really improved much since 1979, education-wise.
Interesting point.
Like maybe a huge federal bureaucracy isn't the best way to make education better.
Right. Makes you think.
The idea is that local communities like those right here in Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena, they're better suited to handle their own educational needs. Active school boards, community initiatives, all that. That's what this Third America thinking is all about. More control at the local level.
Makes sense. So besides education, what else makes up this Third America that Ron Paul represented?
Well, a big part of it was his stance on war. He was consistently anti-war.
Yeah, I remember that.
Woods argues that Paul actually gave the right permission to be anti-war, which opened the door for people like Donald Trump to later criticize the Iraq War.
That's a pretty significant impact.
It is. Paul had a long history of opposing interventionism. He argued against the idea of America as an empire, saying it goes against having a truly free society here at home.
That connects back to thinkers from the old right, like Felix Morley, right?
Exactly.
For those who don't know, the old right was a more isolationist and fiscally conservative wing of the Republican Party before the neoconservative movement took over.
Right.
Morley, like Paul, was worried about how constant involvement in foreign conflicts could hurt liberty here in America.
Makes sense.
The idea of putting the well-being of our own communities like Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena ahead of endless foreign involvement keeps coming up.
For sure. It's a key theme.
Woods emphasizes this apparent contradiction, spending tons of resources on interventions overseas, but then questioning essential services here at home. It's a critique of misplaced priorities. Focus on far-off conflicts, but neglect needs within our own communities. It's a point that resonates with a lot of people.
It does.
So Woods brings up this moment from a 2008 Republican debate. Romney, McCain, Huckabee, and Ron Paul. What was so telling about that exchange?
Well, what Woods points out is that Romney and McCain got into this debate about troop deployments in Iraq. Numbers, timelines, all that. And Ron Paul's response was basically to say, this is all silly.
Silly.
Yes, silly. Because in his view, they were arguing about little details within a fundamentally flawed policy of interventionism. He tried to shift the focus to the real question. Should America be involved in conflicts all over the world, or should we prioritize defending our own borders and interests?
So he was trying to get to the core of the issue.
Exactly.
But as Woods points out, the media mostly focused on the back and forth between Romney and McCain, totally missing Paul's bigger point. It's tough to get alternative views heard when the established narrative is so strong.
It is. But despite being initially sidelined, Woods argues that Ron Paul's message ultimately got out there. It couldn't be contained.
Got out of the tube, as he puts it.
Yeah, exactly. And he gives some really interesting examples of Paul's lasting influence.
Like Scott Horton.
Yeah, Scott Horton, who's deeply influenced by Ron Paul's non-interventionist views. He's debated big names in foreign policy and the policy. Bill Kristol, General Wesley Clark, even challenged Christopher Steele, the guy who wrote the Steele dossier.
Wow, challenging some major figures there.
It's worth noting the different media strategies at play. With Ron Paul, they mostly tried to ignore him at first.
Right.
But with someone like Donald Trump, who was already a huge public figure, the media switched to directly opposing him. Woods suggests that if Paul had gotten more traction, he probably would face the same kind of aggressive pushback.
Fascinating. So how did Ron Paul supporters deal with this media blackout?
They got creative. Woods mentions the Paint the Town Ron initiative. They even put Ron Paul information CDs in with Halloween candy.
Talk about thinking outside the box.
I know, right? These grassroots efforts, person to person, that's powerful stuff. Like neighbors spreading the word in Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena. It can be surprisingly effective.
Really shows the dedication of his supporters.
It does. They felt their candidate wasn't getting a fair shake, so they had to find other ways to reach people, bypass those traditional media gatekeepers. And Tom Woods' books on controversial topics also played a role, spreading these ideas more widely.
Right. Then there's that story about Ron Paul being excluded from the Iowa Tax Forum. Sounds like a moment where the establishment's attempt to sideline him backfired.
Big time. Instead of accepting it, Paul's supporters organized their own event right across the hall. And guess what? Paul ended up drawing a much bigger crowd than the official forum. People marching in with Ron Paul Revolution signs. It showed their enthusiasm, but also this growing gap between the grassroots and the political elite.
A real testament to the power of local organizing and community spirit, something we see a lot of in our area.
For sure. And that energy carried over to the rally for the Republic in Minneapolis during the 2008 Republican Convention. That must have been a huge effort, especially trying to hold a big event at the same time as a major party convention.
Logistically, it must have been a nightmare.
It was. Woods talks about the trouble they had finding hotel rooms, rental cars, all of that. But they filled the Target Center for what Woods considers one of Paul's most powerful speeches. It proved that even without support from the big parties, there was a large, motivated base of support out there.
So at first there was a lot of pushback against Ron Paul, even ridicule from mainstream conservatives. Woods mentions grassroots GOP activists repeating media talking points, dismissing Paul.
Yeah, back then, questioning the established conservative positions, especially on foreign policy and money matters, that was seen as unacceptable in mainstream Republican circles.
It was almost taboo.
Right.
Yeah.
But Woods points out that things have changed. Now a lot of people on the new right are saying, hey, Ron Paul was right about a lot of stuff.
We see it in the language people use now. Words like warmongers, The talk about abolishing the Department of Education. These ideas were once considered radical, but now they're part of mainstream conservative discussions.
Absolutely. And Ron Paul's early skepticism of big pharmaceutical companies, his support from the health freedom movement, those things foreshadowed some of the debates we've seen lately, especially around COVID-19.
It's like he was ahead of his time.
In a lot of ways, yeah. Woods points to people like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul, both coming out of the Ron Paul revolution, as examples of that continued influence, especially in their approach to health policies.
So it wasn't just conservatives who were influenced by Ron Paul. Woods even mentions Elon Musk retweeting Ron Paul about auditing the Federal Reserve. It shows how Paul's ideas are reaching a wider audience, even people who aren't necessarily traditional libertarians or conservatives.
That's pretty remarkable.
And that anecdote about Tom Woods testifying before Ron Paul's subcommittee and Paul later apologizing for the way some of his colleagues behaved, that speaks volumes about Paul's character, his commitment to open discussion, even when his own allies disagreed with him.
He was a principled guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Woods emphasizes the importance of America first for the MAGA movement, connecting it to figures like Pat Buchanan and Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, that idea of putting domestic concerns first, being more cautious about foreign entanglements, that has roots in Ron Paul's consistent message.
Makes sense.
America first should mean putting the interests of Americans first, period. That resonates with a lot of people who want to see our nation and our communities thriving.
It's about taking care of our own.
Exactly. Now, moving beyond politics, Woods highlights the importance of the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum. Why does he see that as such a vital project?
That's a good question. What's so special about this curriculum?
Woods sees it as a way to prepare young people for the future, giving them practical skills that are often missed in traditional education.
What kind of skills?
Things like managing money, starting businesses, public speaking. It's about empowering individuals and communities at a fundamental level, setting the next generation up for success. This kind of local, community-driven education, it's all about giving people the tools they need to thrive, much like the spirit of empowering residents in Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena to take charge of their children's learning.
It's about taking ownership of your own future.
Exactly.
So looking back at everything, it seems like Ron Paul, though he didn't win any elections, had a huge impact in the long run. Ideas that were once dismissed are now gaining acceptance.
You could say he was ahead of his time.
Woods even talks about the beginning of Ron Paul's vindication, with Roger Stone pushing for a privately funded Presidential Medal of Freedom.
It's like people are finally starting to see the value in what he was saying all along.
Absolutely. Woods expresses deep admiration for Paul's integrity and courage, even quoting Emerson, who said something like, "A single person standing up for their ideal will eventually see the world come around to their view."
It's a fitting tribute to someone who often stood against the tide.
So, to sum up this deep dive, we've seen how Ron Paul's 2007 presidential run, though it didn't lead to victory, had a profound and lasting effect on American politics.
Yeah.
He represented a third America, challenging the establishment on war, monetary policy, the role of the federal government. And despite facing resistance and even mockery, his ideas slowly gained traction, influencing the MAGA movement and making people rethink long-held assumptions.
For sure. Understanding these roots helps us make sense of the political landscape today, with all its different perspectives.
It's a valuable perspective to have, and it really gets you thinking. If Ron Paul's ideas, once considered fringe, could become part of the mainstream conversation, what other unconventional ideas that are floating around today might gain traction in the years to come, especially at the local level in communities like Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena?
It's an interesting question.
It really is. It makes you think about how local action, individual conviction, can spark bigger shifts in thinking and maybe even shape the future in ways we can't predict.
Yeah, the power of local action.
That's what it's all about. If you enjoy exploring these ideas with us, please consider supporting our show at thinkandactlocally.com/donate. You can find the link in our show notes. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.